an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Grey Sister, chapters 43, 44, and 45. In these chapters, so much happens, I don't even know what to say in this intro, but I think the one that affected me the deepest was saying goodbye to Darla. Y'all, we lost my girl. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. Martin's in the chat. Hi, Martin. He says, hi there. I'm at work, so I won't be typing much. Well, sir, excuse me. Hopefully you are going to be able to enjoy this later on when you aren't working. Thank you very much for the commission. Y'all, these chapters were just so packed, and I was so hopeful that because Darla did not die immediately, she was gonna be okay. But instead she dies later, in front of Nona, which I feel has to be the worst way for one of Nona's friends to die in, like, if you are her enemy, if you are Nona's enemy. She just takes her friendships so very seriously. And I really just this is one of those things that I don't want to lay at the feet of this author as an intentional thing, but I can't not comment on this trend. So I have to say something about it, or else my conscience will prick at me. There is a thing in fiction, especially fiction written by men, where big, brawny, strong, unattractive female characters are really like the clinch player in a fight and then die. It's just a thing where the pretty characters who are good fighters often manage to make it to the end, and the not pretty characters do not. And I don't want to think of it in just the terms of she was ugly, so she had to die. But it's tough to not feel that way when it is such a consistent, repetitive thing that I have seen in so many books. You guys know how much I read for the show, how much I read before I even started doing this, and all of the TV that I have to watch for the show as well as personally. This is a very common trope. And it bums me out deeply that Darla was put on the chopping block here. Now, Arabella dying. Arabella feels like she's key to this sort of triad that the author is setting up with Nona and Zomi. So, is it Zomi? I think I picked the character's name from a different book series that I'm covering. Fuck. But I just... It's just like, well, couldn't we have one of the main trio, this triad of key players, one of them be like a big, brawny, unattractive, like kind of ogre of a girl? I just, that's so, like, you just don't see it. You don't see those kinds of women being represented in a way that makes them main players. They are always sidekicks, and they always die. And I was like, when it turned out she wasn't dead, I got really hopeful, like, oh, we're not going to do that this time. Oh, cool. and then she does die. I'm not trying to shit on the emotional effect. Of course, I understand the motivation here for Nona, but that is a kind of fridging, and it just sucks. And so I had a combination of feelings of loss here. The sadness at this trope being carried out in a way that I was really hopeful I was going to manage to miss this time. And losing a character whom I had really grown to like a lot, and who was so incredibly direct in the way that she handled everything. So pouring one out for Darla, because she's just, we shall not see her like again, as they say. And like I said, I'm not trying to like say that this author is a bad person or anything for this. It's just the kind of thing that I don't think a lot of authors realize it. And especially when I'm talking about male authors, I don't think that they see the value judgment of making characters that are more important, more attractive, and more, and I mean that in a conventionally attractive sense. I don't even necessarily mean they're sexualized exactly, because this author does not sexualize his characters. There's no like discussion of, the curves of Arabella's body or anything like that. But it is the sort of thing that we are very specifically told exactly how Darla is built and the way that she looks. And, it's just, this is something that Rashawn and I talked about in the Dresden Files too. Spoilers for, I believe it was Summer Night. And there is a character who is, she's half troll and really just kind of awful to look at in a lot of ways. And all of the other women in that series are just almost uniformly supernaturally hot. And she winds up dead by the end of the book, having like sacrificed herself on behalf of everybody else. And it was just one of those moments that like just really frustrated me. So I wanted to talk about it. Like I said, I'm not trying to lay the blame for the trope in general existing at Mark Lawrence's feet. I just think that it's something that we as human beings need to be aware of, that there are characters who we deem as more central to a plot, and we choose how they look. We choose what like physical attributes we're going to give to them as writers. And why do we choose what we do for the characters that we do? And why is it that women who do not fit the conventional standards of what a woman should look like, why is it that they are always the ones assigned to the role of sacrificial friend? The one exception to that I have seen, which is part of why it means so much to me, is Brienne of Tarth in Song of Ice and Fire, who is very unattractive in the books. In the show, she's played by Gwendolyn Christie, who is a knockout. But in the books, she is not attractive, rather awkward, except when she's fighting, and then she's like unbelievable. And so far in the series, she is still alive, fingers crossed. But she was a character that I felt really like it was sort of unusual for her to have such a pivotal POV role in a story like that and not be conventionally beautiful or have some other sort of power at her fingertips. She doesn't have a lot. Her fighting is really the only thing. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about that out of the gate. The other thing that is key that happens in this section is that Nona winds up losing Kiat. And I say Kiat like she loses Kiat, like it was such a terrible loss to her. Obviously, Nona if you had asked her, do you want to be rid of Kiat? I can get rid of him for you. She would have said yes. But I think it's very telling how much later on in that chapter she's missing his voice in her head. And Kiat is one of those like lovely foils. And I think it's so great that the author has Nona recognize that she not only misses Kiat's voice, but that Kiat would want certain things at certain moments, and that she would likely do the opposite just to foil what Kiat wants. Because she has this just innate understanding. If Kiat thinks this thing is something I should do, I probably shouldn't. It's probably bad. But once Kiat is gone and not able to give that easy dichotomy to her actions, it's harder for her to choose to do the better, merciful thing. And I just really understand that. I am a person, this is something I've struggled with my entire life. I have two warring sides to my personality. One side of my personality, which tends to win out a lot of the time, has a deep respect for authority. You would not think so, based on my Facebook feed and how much I say ACAB, but it's true. If there's a sign that says don't walk on the grass, I don't walk on the grass. If the instructions say do not put in dishwasher, I don't put in dishwasher. If my teacher says this is due Friday, I have it ready to hand in on Friday. Anything that any authority figure says about a thing, when that person has the credentials to back up that they are an expert and they know what they're doing and they tell me how it is, I will listen to them and do things in that way. It's just, I instinctively look for signs when I'm in public places to direct me where I need to go. And, it makes me crazy as somebody who does do that. Especially right now with like the pandemic, and there are so many signs that stay 6 feet apart, or you have to wear your mask here, or anything like that. So many people just ignore those signs because they just don't feel like it, and it makes me really twitchy. So there's that one side. The other side of me is so defiant that I will cut my own foot off just to give somebody the finger. And I know that about myself, and I know how damaging this has been in my life. The fact that I instinctively want to do something simply because somebody else told me, you can't do that. Doing that's wrong. Whatever. Because the thing, it's especially true when there's not really a moral black and white to the issue. It's simply somebody trying to impose their viewpoint on me. Even if I kind of agree with their overall, opinion on what should and shouldn't be done, I don't like somebody trying to impose that on my behavior. And that has manifested as I've gotten older and gotten more and more angry at the patriarchy. For example, I started to gain weight as a result of feeling really angry at the fact that I had been working my whole life to stay thin, and realizing at some point that an entire industry profited off me feeling bad about myself, and that I was being the good girl by dieting and exercising, going to Weight Watchers, getting gym memberships, drinking protein shakes, fasting. I was doing all of this stuff and being a good, skinny, perfect, example of femininity. And I started to really see that was what was happening. And I was like, oh, you know what? Fuck this. And I started to gain weight, sort of as a way to give the finger, but nobody else cares. That's what I'm doing, right? That's all in my head. That's a personal, deeply personal thing. And so I hurt myself by trying to, give the finger to the world at large and the fact that patriarchy and capitalism profits off of this. I wound up harming myself in a way that was just pointless, honestly, in a lot of ways. And I get the real sense that Nona can be that way too. She is just somebody who does not want anyone to, first of all, tell her how shit's gonna be if it's in conflict with what she believes is right and true and good. And if those people have any sort of like smugness about it, contempt to them, that makes it all the more motivating to her to do the opposite. And so this whole thing where she winds up getting back at, which Toxis is it? Raymel is his son, right? I'm trying to remember the father's name, but I'll get there anyway. So, but when she does what she does to him, which when I realized what she was doing, I'll tell you what, guys, I just went, oh, I was like, it took a minute for me to really get it. And like out loud, I said that because I was just like, oh, that is really rough. But this is something that she knows Kia would be like approving of, probably. I think Kia would likely tell her to kill the guy. And maybe she thinks that like by not actually killing him, she's being sort of, I don't know, but the harm is so much worse than just death, and she knows that. So I don't know. Does she think Kia would approve or not? I don't. What I'm saying is that I find it really interesting how Nona operates in a vacuum when Kia isn't there to influence her or attempt to influence her. Whether or not she listens to Kia's instructions and does exactly what Kia says isn't necessarily relevant. It's whether or not Kia motivates her in either direction by saying the thing and she wants to do the opposite. And now that Kiat's gone, it changes the dynamic of things, because this whole time it has felt as if Kia is this like negative influence that she's struggling against. That's an external thing that has like, yeah, Kia was let in because of her own bloodlust. So it's not as if no part of her was involved in Kia being in her head, in her body, really. But it's different than simply a dark part of your own self that's whispering to you. Kia is an external being with a very specific sort of outlook on the world. And she was able to rail against what Kia wanted her to do in a way that felt very simple and easy. It was almost like Kia was a compass, and as long as Kia said to do a thing and she knew Kia is a bad influence, doing the opposite was a good idea. And now that Kia's been taken out of the equation, what does that look like for her? Is she going to keep being who she's been? Will she be able to stick to like her better behavior when there isn't somebody telling her, kill them, kill them, kill them? Or is it... I just don't know, you know? It feels like especially Darla's death is going to fuel something. And I worry for Nona's enemies. That's all I'm saying. So when we start with chapter 45, but to refresh everybody, because it's been like a month, so I kind of re-listened to the previous chapters before I started on this section to remind you all that Clara had been going to try and help Nona and Kettle with escaping, and she seems to sort of like believe that let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Oh, you know what? I said chapters 40. Did I say 43, 44? Yeah, I did. Okay. So the last chapters, we have them and they're in the halls, like about to escape. And Clara has like mentioned something about how like there's probably the Shipheart is in like Scherzel's private vault that she's got a lot of treasures in. And Clara says this, but she's also clearly like not interested in trying to break in there. And she gets very agitated at the fact that Nona and Kettle want to try and get to it. And we find out a little bit later in the chapters that Kettle has some idea of what this Shipheart could do if Nona were to lay hands on it. And it's really weird to me that this hasn't come up before. I don't know if it's supposed to be kind of a secret that it has this effect, and that's why Kettle never said anything, like why people would keep this from being known. But they run into Yisht in their attempt to try and get at the Shipheart. And Yisht is possessed by, like, multiple demons. It turns out there's an effect from the Shipheart that essentially magnifies and almost personifies the bad aspects of your personality and turns them into almost living things. So there's this sense that, like, the Shiphearts are the source of these devils. And I'm just so curious why nobody has talked about that, why that's never come up. I don't think Kettle's lying or anything, but it just seems like a pretty important piece of lore that nobody seemed to think to mention. So that is what's going on with Nona and Clara and Kettle in one section of this same palace. And then Abyss Glass is in the midst of a battle that begins to break out. Darla is, like, coming at people. We've got Arabella, like, being a fucking dervish. I mean, I'm going to read that part, but I just really enjoy this. In the midst to figure out on one knee, one hand to the floor, a woman in the tatters of a dress, warping as she struggled to contain her power. Arabella Jotsis. The archers must have been instructed to shoot her at any sign she had begun to walk the path. The last of their number fell wailing from the gallery. And Ara stood, the glow around her limbs and torso almost too bright to look upon. So it's the end of the last chapter. This chapter begins with Clara and Nona and Kettle again. And it didn't really occur to me that with all of this going on, they would be walking into a palace that is undefended in the way it normally would be. It's understandable why Kettle keeps being like, this has been way too easy. It's the kind of too easy that makes it feel like a trap. What the hell is going on? And eventually they find out what's going on, and it's a valid, like, actual thing. It's not that they're being lured in. But Kettle is right to be as suspicious as she is. So evidently part of the security system in this palace is that there are sigils in the walls that if the guards press on them, they can collapse the walls, they can strip away shadow work, they can do all kinds of things that will basically incapacitate these three as fighters. So the first thing that they are going to have to do is disable all of the people who could reach them. So I'm going to read this part that I really enjoy. Nona unwrapped the chain around her waist. She'd fixed it there as a belt for the remains of her prison smock and to provide a place to thrust the spare blades picked up after the battle at the cell block. She set down her weapons and gave the chain to Kettle. Next, she crossed her arms back to back, the knuckles of one hand resting against the inside of the elbow of the other. Bind me. I'm going alone. If Clara doesn't think she can disable the three of them quickly enough, what makes you think you can? That's right, Clara scowled. I'm as fast as you are. These men aren't pushovers. It just takes a moment for them to touch the right sigil, and then... Because I want to kill them. Nona let Kiat take her tongue, her voice becoming a snarl, something alien. I hunger for their deaths. I want their blood to spill. I've been trapped, boxed, poisoned, abused, and now it's my turn. I don't fear destruction. It's the desire to survive that slows you, girl. Nona wrested control back from Kiat, coughed, and added in her normal voice, if that's all right with you. Woo! I don't fear destruction. It's the desire to survive that slows you. I gotta tell you, that is a badass line, kids. That is some really metal shit. Oh, God. So, long story short, this ploy works. You know, Nona comes towards them. She's like, help me, all chained up. The guards are like, dude, what is this? She's like a kid. What is happening with her? And they let her just get closer than they should because she is so small and just looks so unthreatening. In the moment while the three men registered the alien blackness of her eyes, Nona tore one arm across the other, shredding iron links beneath her blades. She scattered chain segments at the guards and sprinted the remaining 5 yards, hurling herself sideways into the air. Deep in the moment, Nona twisted to ride both above and below the sword blades reaching toward her. She hit all three men with her back to them, one arm extended to drive blades into the neck of the leftmost man, the other arm crooked to skewer the groin of the middle man, her legs tangling with the legs of the man on the right. All of them fell. Before they hit the ground, Nona had ripped her blades from the leftmost man's neck and doubled up to stab the rightmost in the head. She cut short the cries of the groin-stabbed man with a slash across the throat. Yo. I just want to see that. I just want to see it. I just want to see it on film. That's all I'm saying. That sounds insane. And Clara is like, I thought we were just going to knock them out. And she's just, Clara keeps on, like, I can't help but kind of like Clara in my way. But it is really funny how much Clara is not with the program. She just doesn't quite get how Nona's feeling about all of this, because Clara is looking out for number one and she's still thinking about money even in the midst of all of this stuff, you know. So as they head in, this is when Clara is talking about how, you know, I don't know how you got me wrapped into this. Shurzel and Lord Toxis are really rich. And I love when she says, Shurzel and Lord Toxis are, and Kettle interrupts and says, vicious maniacs who would fill the corridor with blood just to float themselves a little higher than their already lofty stations. You know, that is really like a pretty succinct summation of what capitalism feels like. We've got these people who are just so obscenely rich that there's no understanding the amount of money they have. And yet they are still willing to exploit people to get just a bit more. Just a bit more. They're willing to literally let people die. And I just... When is it enough? When do you get enough? When are you done? When are you satisfied? It just feels so endless and pointless and... I don't know. And then we have the servants, and they show up, and Kettle has to cover them all in darkness, and manage to, like, these people just, I believe, just run by them. And this is when Kettle says, we've been so lucky it almost feels like a trap. And Nona says, you know, once I've got my hands on the Shipheart, I'll be able to... Essentially, she feels that it will completely heal her back to her full strength. And she says, Hessa's memory promised so much more. Now, you know, I understand Martin's working, and he's in the chat, but he might not be able to answer this, but perhaps later Martin can. I don't remember exactly what it is in Hessa's memory that makes her think that's how it works. I'm not, you know, I'm not contradicting her. I believe that there's a reason she thinks this, because Nona is not really somebody who, like, jumps to conclusions, but I just don't quite remember. And this is when Kettle says, I think that I'm going to have to be the one to take it. And Nona initially thinks that what Kettle is saying is, because you have a devil in you, you aren't going to be pure enough to touch the Shipheart. But what it turns out she's actually saying is this Shipheart could turn you into something else. Turn you into, as what we see later, Yisht turns into. Nona protests against this, saying, like, well, Yisht had prolonged contact with it. I won't be in contact with it for as long as her. She was with it for days because she was traveling with it. And And Kettle's like, she wasn't with it for days. Like, Scherzel doesn't just send Yisht and Yisht carries it all the way to the fucking palace. She had people who were set up to bring it and transport it. Probably Yisht only spent a couple hours with it as well. And look what the fuck happened to her. So, yeah, that will be enough time. And I am not willing to let that happen to you. But apparently Kettle's willing to let it happen to her, which is interesting. I wonder if she just feels like maybe the dark parts of her personality aren't as frightening as Nona's are, or if she just thinks that Nona is capable of more harm, or because like she has more ability than Kettle does. I don't know why she feels like her carrying it is better. Maybe it's just, I would rather sacrifice myself than allow you to do this to yourself, which is certainly reason enough. But it's an interesting question finding out that this is how this works. And this is when Nona is thinking about the Shipheart with Kiat. And Nona's mind was full of the Shipheart now. Close, powerful, the beat of it running through her, not kind, not comforting, just vast and endless. I feel it too. Kiat's voice held a certain hunger. You do? Like a memory. I know this thing. It's old as I am. He sounded stronger by the moment. But the Shiphearts are older than the Empire. The Shiphearts brought the tribes to Abath. You think so? Everyone knows they did. Maybe they drew your people here. They didn't carry them. What do you know about it? You never know the answer to anything interesting. All of a sudden you know things? The heart is waking up my memories. And why would it do that? Because it's where I was born. Woo, shit. Nona is just like, I'm going to ignore that and not continue this conversation. Kiat blazed across her chest and down over her abdomen. He seemed to be feeding on the Shipheart's power in ways that Nona couldn't understand. His natural anger and lust to kill began to bleed out into her. Earlier she'd felt his grip on her weakening and thought that one day she might be able to drive him out. Kettle must know of the devil by now, having worn Nona's flesh and bones back in the Tetragode. What she might do about it was a problem for later, if there was a later. So, all of a sudden, they all sense that Yisht is here. And the description of her just sounds really, really cool. She wore the same black garb, knives across her chest, and a black leather harness, her tular, the flat-bladed sword favored by the ice tribes, at her hip. She seemed to wear the same body, too, though it moved in unnatural ways, as if occupied by some larger presence. I wish that I could picture what that means. All I can do when somebody describes something in that way is picture Edgar from Men in Black when he's filled with cockroaches, basically, and is moving in this, like, and it doesn't sound like that because he's incredibly awkward and can't stand or sit properly, and she's like, superhumanly graceful and fast at this point. So it's hard for me to picture what this means. The flat bones of her face cut the same angles, but her black eyes sat in a crimson sea rather than the whites she once had. And her skin had become a moving patchwork of scarlet, deep purple, black, gray, and bone white. Where Nona had 1, and Raimel had returned from death's border with 4, Yisht had so many that they competed for space, surging across any exposed skin. Nona could almost hear them screaming for her blood. Yikes. And when she smiles, her teeth are bloody, which is just killing me. Like, is there just blood in her mouth all the time? Did she just bite somebody? Does she bite her own mouth and wind up like, what happened? But that's a real fucking look. That's terrifying. So, at this point, Yisht very nearly beats Nona. She gets her in... She can see what Nona's about to do, every move that she makes. And Kiat's like yelling at Nona, do something that she can't stop even if she knows it's coming. But she doesn't manage to do it. And Nona winds up cornered. And Kiat keeps trying to get Nona eventually to just run. The nun's doomed. In any case, she's just a burden. And the longer that she sticks fighting against Yisht without running to save herself, the fainter his voice becomes. And eventually, Nona has no weapon. And she's just running at Yisht empty-handed. And all of a sudden, fucking Kiat comes flying out of her and hits Yisht in addition to all of the fucking other devils she's got. Shot away as though drawn by a bowstring to hit Yisht square in the forehead. The ice triber drew in a huge breath like the gasp made when you fall into freezing water. She dropped the gray mustard package and staggered back, still gasping, wheezing for air. So, by the way, she's injured Nona pretty well here. Eventually they're able to sort of like use this super glue to stick the wound together. But I am very like... I don't really understand why Kiat's presence causes Yisht to lose it the way that she does. Because Yisht is screaming in pain, bellowing and roaring and just sort of stumbling around as if she's caught in the midst of like this sourceless pain. And I don't really get why that is what happens when Kiat is added to the mix versus all of the other devils that are already occupying her body. Because, I mean, you know, when Nona gets taken by Kiat, she didn't have that reaction as far as I can remember. So I don't really know why this happens here. If it's like, I'm fine with it. I really enjoyed the fact that Kiat inadvertently, because Kiat's like trying to get Nona to leave because he does not want to leave Nona, which she makes a joke about how, oh, you don't want to share space inside Yisht? Is it too crowded for you? And I'm like, is that it? Is that all it is? I don't know. But that pretty much incapacitates Yisht so that they are able to continue on. And Nona thinks about going back and killing Yisht while she's so disabled. But there's just a risk that she's still going to be able to like pull one out, and they just don't really have time. So they are basically licking their wounds for a second, making sure that they're the worst of the wounds that can lead to blood loss and death are sewed up, so to speak. And Nona can feel the Shipheart. Clara says, we have to go. I checked ahead. There's some kind of battle going on in the Great Hall downstairs. It's the ideal distraction. And Clara is yelling, no, 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 we have to go now. And Nona says, we came for the Shipheart. And we can't come this close and just leave. Clara screwed up her face, locked in some inner battle. At last the words blurted from her. Aura's here. That's what the fighting downstairs must be. They're trying to rescue the abbess. And Nona just looks at Clara like, oh my god, bitch, I cannot believe you were about to not tell me that shit. You really thought about not telling me. Fuck. She does tell her. So I feel like in some ways maybe that's growth, but it's hard to tell. Clara, if she does grow, she does it very slowly. There's 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. So then we go to chapter 3. Arabella Jotsis shone brighter than Abath's sun had burned during the lives of men. A white light broke from her, like the hope that stood as a lone diamond in the ruby heavens. Abbess Glass turned away from the girl, shielding her eyes. Someone blundered into her, a perfumed woman, tripping over her long gown. Glass caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Cover your eyes, dear. It will be all right." It took Glass a few more moments to realize she held Joeli Namsis. Her grip tightened. "Joeli? You can try to end this. With your skills, you might make peace here. Try to change Scherzel's mind toward moderation." Joeli is such a fucking bitch, and I can't wait. I, for one, can't wait to see her go down. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I hate her so deeply and so much. I don't know what she's getting out of all of this. You know, like, I knew that she was just out to get Nona because of her connections, but the fact that she is so ready for the abbess to die as well, and it's just like another level of hatred that I didn't know she harbored, and it's very upsetting in its way. And when Joeli doesn't, like, cooperate, she, like, pulls away. The abbess does think to herself, well, even if she did agree to try, probably Scherzel is warded well enough that she wouldn't be influenced by Joeli. Maybe that's just her trying to tell herself what she needs to tell herself, you know? And she sees Thurontoxis and Lano. Thuron is the one that I'm thinking of, okay. Because Lano is the son, and Ramel is the one who had died. It's hard for me to keep their names straight in my mind. I don't know why. But they wind up escaping into the corridor, and we will see what's going on with them a little bit later. The blinding white intensity lessened as Ara spent the power she had taken from the path. She wove a path among the silhouettes of palace guards that stumbled toward her, leaving them in her wake, blind, insensible, or smoking, depending on the length of contact made between them. Each step brought her closer to Glass and the judges. Darla had descended from the gallery, possibly by hanging and dropping from the railing. Glass watched her use some kind of heavy wind instrument to flatten a guard, then steal the woman's sword just as two more guards closed in on her. Across the room, Regal and Saphira were locked in unarmed combat, their battle blisteringly fast. And I love this detail that she realizes that even though Saphira has all of these tricks up her sleeve because, you know, she's a Noi Gwyn, she isn't going to use them because basically this dude is just like a brawler. And she thinks that if she can't just beat him in sheer skill, then that's just embarrassing. So she's going to fight him with bare hands and be as direct about her win as she can. Because she's too proud. And Ara comes up in front of the abbess and says, "Your instructions?" And Glass says, "We'd better leave, don't you think, dear?" Oh my god, I love that so much. So they head out, and, you know, shit is really going off. There are arrows being fired. Shit is just like, this is a bloodbath, basically. And I need to remind everybody that there are a lot of people in this hall that did not sign on for this. I mean, nobody really signed on for this. But it's easy to think of everybody in the hall as being somebody with, like, a real sort of like a type of fighting person of one line or another. But there are, like, elderly people, a lot of, like, lords and ladies who are just, you know, were here to observe the whole thing. And don't get me wrong, because the abbess had been going to be, like, burned alive. And these people were literally here to watch her be burned as their after-dinner entertainment. So I'm not saying that they are good people who didn't deserve this, because they all seem pretty fucking terrible, and I'm not sad that they are all dying. But it is interesting to realize how completely unprepared everyone here was for the way this went. So moments later, Ara had downed two of the guards that were harrying those of the Sis retreating with Darla, and made a path for the retreat through the banquet doors. Glass, Regal, Seldom, Adjika, and Melchior followed. An arrow caromed off Melkir's shoulder plate, another hammering into the door to Glass's left. And this is, like, there's 4 long tables ran the length of the banquet hall, leading towards a dais where the High Lords must have dined with Scherzel. They are heading in that direction. And Glass is, like, looking at, there is somebody, like, up in the doorway in the gallery. And she's looking up and she's like, who is that standing there looking down at us like that? And it becomes really clear that it's fucking Joeli. And she is doing pretty violent thread work on people. And by that I mean she is just going hard with instilling fear. And she instills fear in Regal at one point and gets him to just bail. And eventually he rejoins the group and he's, like, really ashamed of the fact that he ran. And it's such a bummer to know that he was not in control of himself at that point, but he doesn't know that. He didn't see Joeli, and I don't think he really understands about thread work. So in his mind, he, all of a sudden, his, like, courage just left him for no reason. But yeah. And I hate her so much. I know I've said this, but I really do. Darla froze in mid-parry as if suddenly distracted by some vital thought. A heartbeat later, the guard to her left drove his sword into her side. Darla had nothing but a tattered gown to armor her. She folded around the steel, cursing, now lost among her attackers. They closed in, swords rising and falling. Y'all, I'll tell you what, when that chapter ended that way, I was just about ready to reach into the pages and strangle Joeli my damn self. I hate this bitch already so much, and the fact that she's, like, the one responsible for Darla's death, forget it. Forget it. She's going to be disemboweled by the end of this. Nona is going to, when she finds out exactly who the one is responsible, that shit is not going to be pretty, kids. It is not going to be pretty. So then we go back to Clara, Kettle, and Nona. And they are looking for Abbess Glass. They are not sure how, like, but by the time they get into the main area, it looks like some of the battle is over. And let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where, right, this is where they have the talk about Yisht carrying the Shipheart and how long she had it for. And then they overhear Thorantoxis and his son. And his son is saying, what is Scherzel going to think of us if we just scuttle off and hide? I'll make for the gates. They don't know the palace. That's where they'll go. They're not getting out. I'll bring Scherzel the old woman's head. You know I'm right. We outnumber them 50-1. And he just basically takes off, leaving Thorantoxis, who it appears does know that he is right, and is like, all right, fine. But Isted, who is his, like, assistant, I guess, they are going to go to their rooms and just sort of wait for everything to die down. And Nona, hearing his voice, is just overcome by this fucking rage, which you fucking would be, right? This is a person who has been stalking her, for lack of a better word, for years now. It has been so long since she killed his son, and he has still not let that shit go. He has been after her for ages. And he finally gets a hold of her and is fully, like, boner prepared to torture her. So excited about it. And she thinks about how stupid it would be to get caught because she wants to turn around and deal with this guy. Because she's going to be too proud to run. And she's like, I can't. That's just that would be so stupid. But she doesn't resist. And honestly, I was kind of like, part of me wanted her to do the, like, smart thing and just, you know, not engage on this, because I'm so worried about everything in general that I'm like, oh, this guy isn't worth it, girl. But on the other hand, I was really glad that she decided to, like, most of what Nona does is a reaction to the threats on her friends. It's so rare to see her do something to stand up for herself when it's not just a matter of, like, I need to stand up for myself so I don't die in this instant in a fight. She doesn't tend to, like, go out of her way to get vengeance on people. That's not something that we see from her too much. So there was a part of me that was kind of pleased to finally get that from her. So she surged up as fast as she could on her good leg and punched Rameltaxis at the junction of chin and neck, driving claw blades deep into his brain. Oh, not Rameltaxis, sorry. Yisht. She drives her claw blades into his brain, ripping free in a crimson spray Nona made to throw herself at Lord Toxis. Abused flesh can only tolerate so much. Nona's leg collapsed beneath her and she fell sprawling before her enemy. Thuron immediately began to turn to flee. Nona managed to swing her non-traitor leg to kick his trailing foot, and he toppled face first into the rug that ran the length of the corridor. She grabs his face and smashes it into the floor. There's a rug on the floor, but nevertheless, she is smashing his face into the floor. She tells Kettle to unlock the door. It's just a random door nearby. And they drag him in there. Nona sliced and lifted Thuron's thick jacket, winding it around his head so there would be no trail of blood. And they drag him in there. She rips open his shirt. She gets the flesh bind, which is the super glue that I was saying earlier that they use to close their wounds. And she gets the flesh bind and I'm like, what is she doing with this? What is she going to do? Because all I could think was, like, is she going to glue, like, parts of his body to himself? Like, I don't really get it. Nona knelt, put the tub to one side, and further sliced apart Thuron's jacket. She found the leather pouch containing the harm and extracted the sigil-worked disc of iron with considerable care. I'll be honest, y'all. Even as she's doing this, I'm still not getting it. I'm still not realizing what she's planning to do. Her fingers didn't want to go anywhere near it. She forced them to their task, requiring the same effort as if she had wanted to hold them to hot coals. Next, she applied the last of the fleshbind to the sigilled surface. Her mouth twisted as she contemplated the pallid skin covering the small of Lord Thuron Toxis's back. A better person wouldn't do this. And she says this out loud. Part of her wanted Kiat to be there in her mind, screaming at her to act. She glanced at Kettle, finding the woman's face free of expression. Any fair court would give the death sentence for his crimes, Kettle said at last. It's for you to decide how. Nona remembered the Toxis, father and son, leaning over her in that Noi Gwyn cell, and pressed the harm firmly into the small of Thuron Toxis's back, holding it there as he went rigid with an agony whose measure she could not forget. She held the disc in place long enough for the fleshbind to form its bond. And once she does this, and I quite realize, I was just like, oh my God, that is fucked up. Now, I have no doubt this dude is going to survive this. I really believe we're going to see him again. This is because she thinks to herself, like, what if the pain is enough to kill him? I don't think that it's going to be that easy. It would be kind of great if he wound up also dead. And part of me does kind of want her to just kill him. But he is such a sadist that doing this to him feels too much like actual justice. This is something that I struggle with a lot, is like, the quick death of somebody who has subjected other people to drawn out torture doesn't often feel satisfying. So, and Clara asks, why isn't he screaming? And Nona says, it hurts too much. And that I had forgotten, that it hurts too much to even scream. If they took too long to find him, perhaps the pain would kill him, or perhaps he would survive until he died of thirst. Twinges of regret and shame ran through Nona while Kettle set to work on the lock again, but each time she thought of returning to put an end to the man, some image from the cells would rise to stop her. And at this point, they are like, all right, so we heard what they said about the abbess and how his son was heading towards the gate, so we are going to have to catch up with them. And we go to chapter 45, back into the fight. And poor Darla, she's like, I was shocked that she survives this, because Arabella springs into action, leaping higher than Glass had seen anyone leap or had imagined that they might, in order to save her friend. And she manages to get the guards off Darla, but it's too late. Darla's been mortally wounded, and she winds up dying later. And so they are heading as a group. There's a bunch of them towards the gates, just as Lanotaxis had predicted, because they do not know the palace very well, and they don't know how to get out without heading in that direction. And Carven sees that the gates are shut and there's soldiers in front of them, and they're trying to figure out another way to get out. And Carven says there's no other way, not for us. They say there's ways into the mountain from the basements, but I don't know how to get there or how to get through through the caves if we found them. And Ara basically is like, all right, I think it's time for us to die. Like, I think this is it, and that we're not getting out of this, and I am ready to go down fighting. And Regal, for his part, says, I'm game. I came for a free meal. I get enough of fighting to the death back in Verity, but I'm damned if I'm supporting that woman against the Emperor or inviting the Sithrall over the mountains. Seldom spoke up behind Glass. We're done for. We are. Ajika joined them. We should pray. So they're in the middle of praying, and all of a sudden, the doors open, and Lord Glossus is coming out and with a nephew, and I think there's an old woman as well. Lord Glossus, last to arrive, clambered up the stairs from the cellar, helped by a young nephew. They're on our trail. I could hear them coming in the corridor right behind us. They're coming. And they get ready to just, like, slice down on whoever it is coming up through this doorway. But here comes Clara and Kettle and Nona. And I love Glass's reaction of just being like, that is the fastest I have ever had a prayer answered. Well, goddamn. I love her so much. She tells Nona, I've reconsidered your punishment. Death was too harsh. Banishment seems too extreme, so no visits to town for a month, and you're to attend the optional spirit classes on 7 days instead. I love Glass so much. I really do. So Nona doesn't tell them what her plan is here. They're asking, how are you going to get us out? Because they all seem to understand that Nona is the one to turn to here, which I think is really interesting. And, you know, in the same spirit, when Nona tells them to do some shit, they all do it. Even, like, the Lord What's-His-Face, Jotsis. So she sees the carriage, which is apparently, like, huge and could actually hold all of them. And she says, is it a clear path to the outer gates, apart from all the archers and the soldiers? And she says, everyone needs to get into the carriage. How will that help? I will move it. There are palace guards entering the cellar below as we speak. Get in the carriage and you might survive. So they get in, and she begins to light a fire. She smashes a lantern at the base of the piled hay. She says, block the stairs. Regal moved to begin the task while the others stood horrified. You'll burn us alive. She's mad. Look at her. Nona ignored the cries of protest. Make sure the horses can get out, Tara. And Kettle's like, yeah, because everybody's shouting and protesting. And Kettle says something like, no, look, no offense, girl, but I don't really know what the plan is either, and I don't really get it. And Nona says, I'm going to walk the path, unlock the doors. And we find out here that apparently walking the path is something that you cannot do more than one time in a day. It's just too dangerous. Like, witches have literally exploded from doing this and left like craters in stone walls. And Ara is also trying to tell Nona, you can't do that. And Nona is about to respond to Ara when she sees Darla and realizes what has happened. And she tries to say, like, can't we save her? Aren't we going to be able to save her? And Darla says it's too late, and she says tired. Her brown eyes clouded with confusion, a kind of wonder, staring at some distant place above Nona's head. A moment passed. Another. Darla's gaze remained fixed. She's gone, Nona. Guys, this killed me. I was so mad. I knew she was probably going to die once we saw how bad her injuries were, but nevertheless. So, this is going to be, I think, some serious motivation for her. I hate this. Glass retreated from the heat and smoke, coughing, making for the carriage. A panicked horse ran past her, nearly sending her to the floor. She reached the steps and helped Lord Glossus into the carriage ahead of her, Adjika coming up behind. The survivors were packed along two broad bench seats, crowding the stuffed leather and crammed upright in the space between. Nona, Ara, and Kettle came from the fire. It swirled around the three of them like a cloak of shadows and flame. You can't. It's madness. Ara lacked conviction now. But what choices were there? And that's the end of this chapter. And after this, it's chapters 46, 47, and epilogue. So the next episode is going to be the last one of coverage for this book. And then there's the third book, which I don't remember what the title of it is. I don't know if I know what the title of it is. But we'll be moving on to that one. So, Martin says, Holy Sister. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, guys, I'm really excited to find out what happens. I'm not gonna lie. I can't wait. I don't know when the next episode of coverage is for this book. I hope that it's soon, but I am dying to know what Nona does here, because I have faith that she's going to make it, that she'll walk the path and she'll be able to, but I don't know what that looks like. I'm not really, I don't know why she should survive when most people do not seem to be able to survive. So I guess we'll see. The next episode isn't until October 6th. I'm going to die until then, a month. I might listen to it now and then come back and re-listen to it later, though. I might do it. All right. Martin says, what about ZOLE? Thank you. I called her Zomi because that's the name of somebody else from another book. I don't know. I really don't, because they left her behind, but I think she can take care of herself. I don't know. I expect her to turn up because the caves are attached to the palace, but I don't know what role she'll play here. I don't know. So I'm over time. I have to wrap up, but thank you again so much, Martin, for commissioning this. I have been really enjoying it. I hope that you guys have been too. And I will be seeing you in October with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.